Well, this is Paul Williamson. Thank you for tuning into this short presentation about our learning, instruction design, and learning theory. And I just wanted to quickly go over behaviorism, cognitivism, talk a little bit about Robert Gagne and Malcolm Knowles and his andragogy. First, we'll start with behaviorism. We know this has been around a long time. It kind of came out of psychology way back in the modern era, I would say, with Pavlov. Remember Pavlov's dog and that experiment there, the stimulation, food, salivation, a bell, and then salivation. And in the United States, John B. Watson picked that up and studied that a little bit more in terms of human behaviors. Then Skinner also worked with this stimulus response patterns and conditioned behavior. And some of this has been brought over into education. For instance, Skinner would say a positive reinforcement or rewarding someone or a response would be repeated. And then he talked a little bit about negative reinforcement responses that perhaps allow for a negative or undesirable effect. And in one of our readings for this week, the author, Brenda Mergel, talking about instruction design and learning theory, mentioned behaviorism movement from psychology into education didn't really happen in the United States until the 60s, and largely kind of came out of a work by Paul Settler's book, and he talked about behavioral objectives movement. For instance, objectives had to be specified, quantifiable, and have terminal behaviors that match the specific objectives. So that kind of is a nutshell of behaviorism. And we come to the concept of cognitivism, and I also put in these kids here building something, so I like to think also of constructivism. Although cognitivism was kind of an outworking of some of the questions that weren't answered in the behaviorist view. So cognitive theory began to look at associations that are established in terms of knowledge structure and how new information is compared to existing cognitive information, and then a lot was spoken about short-term memory and then how that short-term memory gets transferred into long-term memory for later retrieval. And so this became sort of the time of learning about meaningful events and effects and how these are transferred from short-term memory to long-term memory. Terminology like state-dependent effects and schema effects were common terminology for that time. Then we move into constructionism, which is where learners actually build or construct, which is why I put the picture in there of the kids with the building blocks, begin to kind of construct their own reality and use a more of a creative approach. So a lot of learning theorists, and it still was in the realm of psychology as well, and also has a philosophical underpinning where in terms of cognition, the understanding there was that learners would construct a mental structure or picture that would match an external structure located in the environment, which is kind of what these kids are doing. You can see too on my graphic to the right, the kids are interacting. So you can see a little bit of connectionism in there where the kids are learning to kind of build things with each other. And we see this a lot in our K through 12, especially middle school in the United States, where kids are having projects that are reaching across international borders. So it's pretty cool how that's happening. And then, of course, Robert Gagne came around and started looking at events for preparatory to learning that he felt were important. And so, and it works both for the educator or the guide by the side or the teacher, instructor, and then the learner. So he came up with these 9 events of instruction that are vital to really for the learner and for the educator. So this is, I guess you could call this Gagne's taxonomy of learning. That's what the author Brenda Mergel has called it, and that comes out of our reading for this past week. So gaining attention, setting objectives, stimulating recall, presenting the contents, providing guidance, listing performance, giving feedback, evaluating, enhancing the transfer. So you can see the depiction of the kids on the left of the screen, as you look at it, are ready to learn. They put their hands in the air, and they're prepared to learn. Probably it looks like emotionally and cognitively. And then finally, Malcolm Knowles, who, as adult learners, we've come to appreciate not so much this is a theory, which we think that Malcolm Knowles never intended it to be. These are just his, if you will, concepts or ideas about how adults learn that perhaps are different than children learners. So he came up with andragogy, which was perhaps an advance from pedagogy. But so he said that adult learners tend to have a much more of a developed self-concept and have an internal locus of control in terms of their own motivation to learn. And then they also bring in their life experience, which instructors that teach adults like myself are very good at harnessing the experience that our adult learners bring to us and using that and utilizing that to learn. And then, of course, the locus of control again for an adult. They have a readiness to learn that they often bring to the table. So their approach may be different than a child or even a K through 12 learner. And then the orientations to learning could be that their orientation would be for enhanced job prospects or increase in salary or even just a greater knowledge of a particular topic. So that's Malcolm Knowles' andragogy. So each of these concepts have sort of been woven together into different instruction design concepts, and I look forward to learning more with you during this course in instruction design.
Oh dear.